I'm currently a little over 5 miles into my 12-mile long run, and unfortunately I had to stop the run a little early, and that is because I'm getting a lot of rubbing through the medial side of the Index.03 here. The shoe is pretty narrow, and unfortunately I thought I might be able to get away with it in doing the 12-mile run, and the narrowness of the shoe wouldn't bother me, but I'm getting, like I said, a lot of blistering and hot spots on that medial side of the shoe. I may give the Index.03 another run to see if maybe it's just today, but unfortunately I think I'm gonna have to retire the shoe early. And so with that intro, you can tell what kind of running shoe review this is gonna be, so let's get into it. This is the Salomon Index.03, a fully recyclable, neutral road running shoe that harkens back to running shoes of yesteryear. All right, so before I get into the running shoe review, I do wanna do a quick disclaimer. Salomon did send me this shoe, but with no purpose of reviewing the shoe. They have no idea I'm actually doing this review. Salomon did not pay me to run in the shoe, and like I already said, they have no idea I'm doing the review, so they won't get to have any input on this review prior to its release. And so with that out of the way, let's get into the review of the Index.03. All right, so like I already stated, this is a fully recyclable neutral road running shoe from Salomon called the Index.03, so it's the third iteration of the Index running shoe. I do want to commend Salomon for making a fully recyclable shoe. So my understanding is that the upper, the midsole, and the outsole will all be recycled at the end of the life cycle. There is a QR code on the other tongue of this shoe that you scan once you are done with the shoe, and Salomon will send you a box to ship the shoe back. And on Salomon's website, it says that the shoe will be repurposed in ski boots. But either way, it's really cool to see this initiative by Salomon, and I hope more running companies start following suit. All right, now let's get into the tech specs of the Index.03. So like I already said, this is a neutral road running shoe from Salomon. It is the third iteration of the Index. I'll start with the upper of the shoe. The upper is what Salomon is calling a synthetic textile upper. And one thing to know about this upper is, as you can see, there is a red line that runs all the way around the shoe. This is where the upper is actually stitched into the midsole, so that when you send the shoe back, Salomon will be able to cut the upper off of the midsole. As you can actually see, there is a little hole that says splitting area. So I'm assuming when you send this back, whoever receives the shoe in will know to cut in that area. This hole is the same on both shoes, so it's on the medial side of the heel of both shoes. One thing I want to know about the upper that I will get into later on in the video when I get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of the shoe is that this shoe is extremely narrow through the forefoot. I've actually had this shoe for quite a while from Salomon. They sent it to me like 2 months ago. And the reason I haven't run in it yet, when I did initial step in with this shoe, I immediately recognized that the shoe fit true to size for my men's US 10.5 in terms of length, but in terms of how narrow the shoe is, I could already feel with just the initial step in and not even walking around in the shoe that I was feeling a slight bit of pressure right here through what would be my pinky toe on that lateral side of the shoe. And so it's just extremely narrow through the forefoot. Another thing to note about this upper is that there is absolutely no structure to the upper. You have some heat overlays on the lacing system of the shoe, which I believe are just to help add a little bit of structure to the lacing when you're tying up the shoe. And then you have a heat overlay through the heel counter of the shoe. But again, it adds absolutely no structure to the shoe. Moving on to the midsole, the Index.03 uses a nitrogen-infused TPU midsole with a rocker geometry that Salomon calls the R-camber. It has a 9mm heel-to-toe drop with a stack height of 20mm in the forefoot and 29mm in the heel. So this is a low stack midsole compared to most running shoes that are on the running market today. It did feel quite firm on initial step in, but by my third run that I did today, where I did 9 miles, it did start to soften up. So I do believe this nitrogen infused TPU midsole just needs some time to break in. There really is not too much in terms of structure with this midsole. It is pretty loose. I can easily twist it, and it does have some pop back. So there is some spring and energy return when you're running. All right, and the last thing to go over with the specs is the outsole of the shoe. So the rubber for the outsole of this shoe is what Salomon calls their Conta grip. As you can see, there is quite a bit of rubber throughout the shoe. There's also somewhat of a decoupled groove that gets more extreme through the midfoot and then the heel area of the shoe. And then the lug pattern is a bunch of round rubber lugs that are evenly distributed throughout the outsole of the shoe. I haven't put that many miles on this shoe, and I already show some slight wear with these lugs, so I do wonder how long they will hold up. I did 9 miles today on dirt and mud, and was transitioning between dirt to pavement and then back to dirt. Had no issues with the outsole at all. The rubber holds up well in terms of traction. Like I said, the one thing I'm curious to see is as you put more miles on the shoe, how will the lug pattern hold up? All right, and so with all of that out of the way, I wanna get into what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly of the shoe. So first off, the good of the Salomon Index.03 is that it is fully recyclable. Like I already said, it's an awesome initiative that Salomon is taking in creating a fully recyclable shoe, and I hope more shoe companies follow suit. Another great thing about the shoe is that it is extremely lightweight, and this midsole does give you decent energy return. And then, like I said, the last good for this shoe is that the outsole so far has held up really well in terms of the weather conditions I've put it through. I did put it through some heavy weather usage, and it held up pretty well in those conditions. All right, and the second category is the bad of the Index.03. All right, so the first bad of the Index.03 and most obvious is the minimal stack height of the shoe. So 20 millimeters in the forefoot, 29 millimeters in the heel. With the way the running shoe world is in current state, this is just not something that's really gonna fly for most people. I mean, there are gonna be those runners out there who absolutely love, like I said, those running shoes of yesteryear. But honestly, for me, it's something that is a drawback to the shoe. I really wish that Salomon would have added a little more stack height to the shoe, because in its current state, this is not a shoe I'm gonna be grabbing every single day just because of how low the midsole is. And then I also do wonder about the durability of the overall structure, as well as the midsole and the outsole. I do wonder how many miles I could actually get out of this shoe based on some of the wear and tear I'm already seeing with only like 15 miles on the shoe. And then the fourth and final bad of the Index.03 is that this shoe cost $160 US. And honestly, like I already touched on with the durability of the shoe, as well as the minimal stack height, the unstructured upper, and everything else that's going on with the shoe, I do not believe this is worth $160. I get that Salomon's really excited about the fact that it's fully recyclable, and I wonder if some of that cost is rolled into the cost of the shoe so that Salomon can basically break even with having you send the shoe back and recycle it. But either way, looking at the current state of running shoes that are on the market, there are way better shoes you can get for $160. I believe this shoe in its current state should be priced closer to that $130 price range. So similar to those lower stack height daily trainers. And again, even those shoes you can get 400 to 600 miles out of. And like I said, with the durability being questionable on the shoe, I just think $160 is way too high of a price point for this shoe. I feel like the Index.03 is one of those shoes that had it come out 10 years ago, runners' minds would have just been blown by how innovative and amazing this shoe is. But in 2024, it just does not cut it, and $160 is just too much money. All right, and now the final category, which is the ugly of the Salomon Index.03. There's really only one ugly with the shoe, and I already alluded to it earlier. It is the fact that this shoe is just way too narrow of a running shoe, especially, like I said, on that lateral side of the forefoot. I am someone who has never had a problem with Nike running shoes, and I know that Nike is notorious for having fairly narrow shoes that a lot of people have difficulty running in. And this is the first shoe that I've ever had an issue with having it be too narrow. So like I said, I've only done 3 runs so far in the shoe, and there's partly a reason for that. On initial step in, when I put the shoe on, I just knew right away that it was too narrow. I was training for my half marathon. It was gonna be a PR attempt. And so I didn't wanna risk trying to run in the shoe and having something happen, knowing that it already felt narrow on initial step in. So then once the half marathon passed and I had some ability to be flexible with trying the shoe out, I gave it a run. My first run was 3 miles, but it was in that heavy rain. So I didn't really feel too much of the narrowness of the shoe, because 1, the shoe got soaked almost immediately, and then 2, I wasn't really paying attention to the feeling of the shoe because that whole run was just kind of chaotic in general. So then I took it out for what was going to be my 12-mile long run, and it was at like mile 3 that the rubbing and irritation really started to take kind of a hold, and it became this thing of that's all I started to think about on the run. I ended up ending the run, like you saw at the beginning of the video, a little after 5 miles to go change this out. I had actually debated on retiring the shoe right then and there, and just making this review and basically saying the shoe is unrunnable. But I figured I would give it one more shot to see if maybe it was just that day. It was really hot. Maybe my feet swelled a little bit more, and that's what just made it really hard to run in past that 5 miles. So today I did a 9-mile run in the shoe. Again, I had the exact same issue with it just being way too narrow on the lateral side of the forefoot. I was able to finish all 9 miles. It was a cooler day today, so I do wonder if that played a little bit into it. But again, similar to that 12-mile run attempt I made where I stopped at mile 5, at about mile 3 or 4 is when the rubbing started to really hurt on that lateral side of my foot. So what I'm thinking is that it's just narrow enough that when I first start out, I can feel it, but it doesn't really irritate. But as I continue to land with each foot strike and the foot moves around slightly, it starts to rub more and more, so that by mile 3 or 4, I start to get that feeling of like increased irritation, because on both those runs, that's where I really started to feel it. And it makes me wonder too, with that rainy 3-mile run I did on my first run, again, I didn't take it long enough to really notice the irritation start with the narrowness of the shoe. So on this 9-mile run, like I said, I was able to finish it, but from like mile 3 or 4 to mile 9, it was basically me just thinking about, is my foot going to be all bloody when I get home? Is there going to be blisters? Like, this is uncomfortable. I'm not really enjoying this anymore. It wasn't like I slowed down my run at all. I still had a really decent run in terms of my time and my heart rate and all of that. But when it comes to, like I said, the narrowness of the shoe, it's a no-go. And honestly, I'm heavily debating retiring this shoe altogether, or only taking it for like 3 to 4 mile recovery runs. Because like I said, it seems like 3 miles is kind of the limit where I don't really notice the narrowness of the shoe before it starts to become too much of an irritant. And so that is everything with the Salomon Index.03. The last thing you're probably wondering is, would I recommend this shoe as a running shoe to put into your running shoe rotation? And honestly, the simple answer is no. Unfortunately, there's just too much going on with this shoe that I do not like, for the bad and the ugly, that make it an unrunnable shoe. I have a feeling there's going to be a majority of runners who cannot deal with the narrowness of this lateral side, and that there are going to be a lot of runners who want higher stack heights and more cushioned running shoes.